I would love to be able to give daily updates based on the insanity of the news cycle and all the information coming out of Washington, D.C. over the past 6 weeks. I'm recording this in early March of 2025, and it has been quite a couple weeks since President Trump took office, with news at the VA that folks are getting fired and downsizing, and DOGE coming in and reshaping the organization, and the 5 points email. Let's take a moment to talk about what's going on and what my take on it is. So first, let me offer this disclaimer. I am involved in VA disability benefits appeals. I follow the news. I talk to folks at the VA, but I am not an expert or a fortune teller on what's going to happen in the future and what the VA's plans are. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably seen the news that President Trump has been issuing mandates and goals to reduce the size of the federal government across the board, including the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, again, to be clear, this does not mean that VA disability benefits are going away necessarily, but it does mean that there are going to be fewer folks at the Department of Veterans Affairs actually doing the work for veterans and for veterans benefits and veterans health. So let's get a little bit more into what's going on. It's taken me a couple days to do some of this research and figure everything out. The first bit of news that came out was that 1,000 probationary employees were let go a couple weeks ago. And this was kind of problematic because probationary employee doesn't mean that they're new to the agency, it just means that they're new to the job. And it appears that some of those were from the Veterans Crisis Line. Funny enough, one of them was an individual who'd been with the VA for 18, 19 years and had just assumed the role of personnel attorney, which is an odd choice to fire a personnel attorney when you're about to do a reduction in force, because you're going to need that personnel attorney to defend the agency's choices. But I digress. Some of those folks have been hired back, though, already, and there's actually ongoing litigation to see if those particular firings were even legal, because even probationary employees do have certain rights, and there's certain things that have to happen before they are terminated. They're supposed to look at who's a veteran and give them preference, and they're supposed to take performance into account. So there's a lot going on. It's not even clear that those 1,000 employees that were originally fired are going to stay out of the agency. Then we're hearing news most recently of a massive reduction in force that is being planned. In fact, a memo was quote unquote leaked recently that purports to want to cut the VA by something like 83,000 employees. And this obviously created a lot of buzz and a lot of consternation, a lot of frustration, and a lot of panic even. And I can tell you from talking to VA employees, and I do talk to VA employees all the time, who themselves are frustrated at the bureaucracy sometimes, everyone's concerned and stressed out that their job might be next, even though they're producing and they're moving cases along and granting benefits in many cases. People are worried, and that's a problem, because I think a lot of the folks, some of the top performing employees, might be looking elsewhere for jobs because they don't want to deal with this back and forth of whether or not they're going to be kept on. The last people you want to lose are your top performers. Recently, this leak memo purports to direct the sub-agencies at the VA for a massive restructuring. And I'm actually kind of encouraged by the idea of restructuring. To be clear, and this is my personal opinion, cutting for cutting's sake, probably not the best idea. But I think a sober assessment of the organization structure, and if it makes sense to structure it this way for optimum efficiency to deliver on what they're supposed to be delivering, that's always good. You're always supposed to be looking at whether or not what you're doing can be improved and improving on it. I'm a little concerned about the staffing numbers, though, and I want to get into that a little bit more in a second. But the idea of targeting a staffing goal instead of a what is the best way to achieve the goal mentality is putting the numbers of staff ahead of what the ultimate goal is. If you were in the military, you've probably heard the phrase train to standard, train to time. If the standard is delivery of healthcare, benefits, and services, you want to focus on how many people does it take to do that, not just a number of how many people the organization has or doesn't have. Again, it's a little wonky, but I digress. So let's take a look at this 83,000 number. And for that, I want to know, where are these VA employees going to come from? 83,000 is a lot of employees. So I took a look at the data, and there's actually a dashboard that got pulled up from a couple months ago, so it's probably not inaccurate. And that's looking like there are about 470,000 employees at the VA, and that is a lot of people, 470,000 employees. They want to reduce that to about 390,000 employees, which are the 2019 numbers. Where do all those 470,000 employees work? In my lane, which is Veterans Disability Benefits, there are about 34,984, let's call it 35,000 employees, right? So less than 10% of the organization is actually working in Veterans Disability Benefits. What surprised me was actually the largest single number was in the Veterans Health Administration, the VHA, which was 416,000 employees. I believe that just by the math alone, if the VA intends to cut 83,000 employees, that number is going to necessarily impact the Veterans Health Administration. So they're going to be cutting administrative staff, healthcare workers, and so on from the Department of Veterans Affairs, from the Veterans Health Administration. So that means hospitals and clinics are going to lose staff. That's problematic because I know the wait times are already high. The reason why I think personally that they're probably going to go after the VHA first is because ever since the first Trump administration, they have been announcing that they want to shift more veterans into private care under the Mission Act. And they said very clearly in Project 2025 that they were going to shift veterans outside of VHA healthcare and into the economy, where the VA might still be paying for their health care, but they're seen by private physicians. And for a lot of folks, this makes a lot of sense, especially in subspecialty care where the VA might not have it, might not have enough staff in that particular department. It does allow some flexibility, especially for veterans who are living really far away from a VA facility. The problem with this is that the VA actually does provide, on whole, pretty decent care, especially when you take into account the overall cost of healthcare. So the question I have is, will shifting healthcare outside of the VA actually increase the amount of money the VA is spending on healthcare in the long term? I don't know. I'm sure there are smarter people studying this than I am, but my sense is that based on what they've said is that the majority of these cuts are going to come from the VHA as they outsource healthcare onto the economy and onto the private sector. Interestingly enough, I think that this is actually going to cause a lot of veterans to start using Medicare over VA healthcare, because a lot of veterans who are already on Medicare Advantage, the federal government's already paying a part of their premiums through the Medicare Advantage program. And there was even an article by a former secretary of the VA to say that, hey, the federal government's paying for Medicare Advantage for these veterans who are also receiving VA health care. That should be reconciled, and that would save maybe $1.2 billion a year. Now, I don't know if this is if this is the right answer. I really don't. I'm not an expert in healthcare or healthcare policy. I just know that a lot of veterans really do like their VA healthcare. Some don't. It's not for everybody. The question is it efficiently providing healthcare to the most number of people? And is that the proper thing that should be happening? Again, not an expert on this. This is food for thought. So if you have a strong opinion about this one way or the other, reach out to your congressman. I personally do not. Since I don't personally use VA healthcare, it's not something that I know too much about. But again, this is what I'm seeing, and I think where the cuts are going to happen. With regards to actual cuts inside of the VBA, well, I haven't heard of anything directly, but I don't think that can really get outsourced too much, because you still need people processing these claims. Now, I'm hoping that there are some structural improvements in the VBA to streamline some of these claims processes. I also hope that maybe there's some technological improvements that can be accelerated to help increase accuracy and speed, and remove some of the human error that might be happening. And that's very promising with AI. But again, these are secure internal systems, and the procurement process is really long. I know the VA is working on some AI stuff, some pilot programs, but not soon enough. I don't think personally that they're going to be cutting too many benefits in the VBA because, again, that's not easily outsourced. I could be wrong. I'm speculating based on the information that I have. I think that the majority of the cuts that they're talking about are going to come from restructuring in the VHA. I also find this a little bit problematic, potentially because we have seen a huge increase in the number of veterans using VA healthcare recently, especially with the passing of the PACT Act and so on. Again, if you have an opinion on this, tell Congress, because Congress, they're the ones who control the purse strings. They're the ones who control the budget ultimately. I know it's a little bit more off topic, a little more current events. I know a couple days after the fact came out, after this information came out, but hopefully I'm providing a little bit of light to the situation where some of my fellow YouTubers may just be providing heat. I don't know. I'm not going to denigrate any of them. But with that said, if you have a veterans benefits issue where you've been denied or underrated, what have you, reach out to us and let us see if we can help. And until next time, take care.